Appreciate everyone being here this morning, and we're going to start on Esther chapter 8 in just a minute. But prior to going into chapter 8, I wanted to see how well we could do. If you have your Bibles or device open to chapter 7, and see if we can do a quick recap about what we talked about last week. How did Esther chapter 7 start out?
We're going to go and have a dinner.
Okay, so that's exactly right. Esther has her request granted by the king, and there's going to be a dinner or a banquet that'll include Queen Esther, King Xerxes, and Haman. After they have a little bit of wine, what does the king say to Esther? What do you want? What's your petition? And Esther says, my petition is to grant my life. My request is to spare my people. I and my people have been sold for destruction and slaughter and annihilation. Does anyone remember why she used those words? Those were the exact words that Haman had in the decree that the people were supposed to carry out against the Jews. So she used the exact same words. My people have been sold for destruction and slaughter and annihilation. So at this point, Haman's probably getting pretty concerned because he had the decree written. He knew the words that Esther was using. So we get about halfway through the chapter, around verse 5. What's the king's response? Who would possibly want to take your life? Who would possibly want to annihilate your people? And Esther's response was this vile Haman. And last week we talked about how that was in contrast to how Haman had referred to Mordecai. He referred to Mordecai as, do you remember? That Jew. The king referred to Mordecai the Jew, but Haman had so much hatred for Mordecai, it was Mordecai that Jew. So the king gets upset. He goes out to the garden in a rage. Haman stays behind because he's going to beg Esther to spare his life. The king comes back in, and what's he see?
He sees Haman.
And where's
her fainting couch, or whatever you want to call it.
That's right. That's right. So, you know, back then the meals, you were reclined. You had like a fainting couch, a chaise, and Esther was still on the chaise. Haman's there trying to beg for his life on the chaise as well. And the king comes in and sees him, and his response is, are you going to molest Esther while I'm still in my own house? So one of the king's servants adds fuel to the fire and says, now, you know, this is the king, or Haman is the one that wanted to have Mordecai killed. Mordecai, the one that is your advocate. So there were two charges against Haman, and the decision is to have Haman impaled on the very pole that he had built to impale Mordecai. So last week, as we ended, the final question was, okay, Haman's been impaled. He is no longer in the picture. Is everything good for the Jews now? And why not?
It had the king's seal on it.
Okay, so
it had to be carried out.
there was a decree that Haman used the king's ring on, and the decree went out to the people. That cannot be revoked. So we're still sitting here. It looks like Esther and Mordecai are in good standing, but we now have the issue still remaining with the Jews. And with that, we'll go and start in chapter 8.
I have a question.
Sure.
If we're supposed to be a forgiving people, why would they not have tried him and put him in prison versus just impaling him?
Haman, you know, it was very, very common for the death penalty during that time. And you know, as we read the Old Testament, the laws that God even established for the Israelites can sort of be broken into 3 different categories. One is civil laws, just like we have the civil laws in the city of San Antonio, laws in the state of Texas, and laws in the United States. Some of them were actual civil laws. Some of them were dietary laws, and those dietary laws were driven mainly by no refrigeration back then. So if there was meat available that was sacrificed, that meat could be eaten that day, it could be eaten the next day, but on day 3, it had to be tossed out. So there's many laws in the Old Testament that are dietary laws. And then there's a third set of laws that were religious laws. So God himself advocated capital punishment. There are many crimes that could be committed that God said the end result is capital punishment. So it was certainly not uncommon among the non-Israelite nations, but even God himself had indicated that under certain conditions there could be capital punishment. So, okay, let's go to Esther chapter 8, and is someone willing to read the first 2 verses?
I will.
Okay.
That day, King
Xerxes.
gave the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, to Queen Esther. Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her. And the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Okay,
thank you. So the king gives Haman's estate to Esther. What type of estate did Haman have? Do we know?
Who's the number 2 guy?
Number 2 guy. Must be pretty substantial. And in fact, in chapter 5 and verse 11, if you flip back to Esther chapter 5, verse 11, it says that Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the way the kings had honored him, and how he had elevated him above the other nobles and officials. So exactly right, vast wealth. Number 2 in charge, and he had the wealth to back it up. I don't know for sure if you're familiar with 2 biblical era historians. One is Josephus. Have people heard of Josephus? And the other is Herodotus, Herodotus. And both of them in their historical accounts also record that Haman's estate, his great wealth, was given to Esther. So that's recorded in 2 historical books, even outside the Bible.
Which makes us know that this is not just a story that was written. This is based on history.
Thank you for pointing that out. That's exactly right. We have validation that this just isn't a story, just isn't a fable, just isn't a fairy tale, but that it actually took place in history. What do you think happened to Haman's wife and Haman's sons when the estate was given to Esther? We don't know for sure, but my guess is she was not allowed to continue to live in her quarters nor the guest quarters. I assume his wife and sons were homeless at this point, but the Bible doesn't tell us. Of course, we remember on at least 2 occasions Haman had come home belly aching to his wife. So don't know for sure what happened to her, but I'm guessing that she didn't get to stay at the estate. So the signet ring goes to Mordecai. Who had the signet ring just before Mordecai? Haman. And
Well, actually, the king.
that's correct. The king had it originally. As he elevated Haman to number 2, he gave the signet ring to Haman. We learn about that in Esther chapter 3, verses 10 and 11. So the ring goes to Mordecai, and I'm guessing Mordecai slid that ring on his finger. What do you think went through Mordecai's mind when he's looking down at the ring that Haman had, that hated the Jews and hated Mordecai himself so much? You know, I don't know if he had thoughts of revenge, had thoughts of elation, had thoughts of things work out in the end, but Mordecai had that ring on his finger, the same ring that Haman had used to have the decree of the king go out to have the Jews killed.
Pretty powerful piece of jewelry.
Pretty powerful piece of jewelry, you're exactly right. So the king gives the estate to Esther. What does Esther do with the estate? Has Mordecai be sort of the person overseeing the estate. So don't know for sure if the estate literally changed hands from Esther to Mordecai or if it remained in Esther's possession, but she makes Mordecai over the former estate. So just as Mordecai looking at the king's signet ring, sometimes you got to wonder what Mordecai's thinking as he's walking through the estate. It was a vast estate. He had vast wealth, probably included multiple buildings, probably had gardens, maybe some vineyards. So there was quite a bit to oversee, quite a bit to walk through. And you have to wonder what, did Mordecai feel, what did Mordecai think as he was walking among the estate that he was now responsible for, that used to be owned by the man that was his ultimate enemy. Okay, any other observations in the first two verses? Okay, let's go on to Esther chapter 8, verses 3 through 6. Is there someone willing to read?
Then Esther spoke again to the king, fell at his feet, wept and implored him to avert the evil scheme of Haman to the Agitite, and his plot which he had devised against the Jews. The king extended the golden scepter to Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king. Want to go through 8? Through 6. Then she said, if it pleases the king and if I have found favor before him, and the matter seems proper to the king, and I am pleasing in his sight, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agitite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the calamity which will befall my people, and how can I endure to see the destruction of my kingdom?
Thank you. So, the estate had been handed over, the ring had been handed over, but Esther begins pleading again, and it says that she fell at his feet and wept as she made the plea. And what is she asking for?
Her people to be spared.
Okay, so the edict is still out there. and she referred to it as the evil plan of Haman, which was devised against the Jews. That is still out there. Now, what's it mean when they say Haman the Agagite?
The original people were under King Agag.
Exactly right. And if you go back some generations prior, it goes all the way back to King Amalekite. So for the Amalekites. So direct lineage now underneath the former king is Haman. So Esther's making this plea, and as she makes this plea, what are the ifs that she puts out there? If it pleases the king, if the king regards me in favor, and if you are pleased with me.
Well, and it's the right thing to do.
Say again?
And if it's the right thing to do.
And it's the right thing to do. Thank you. So last week we talked about Esther using that term, if you find favor with me. If we go back to Esther chapter 2, verse 9, as the king was looking for a new queen, it indicates that the selection process to get the candidates, that favor was found upon Esther. And then later we're told everyone she came in contact with found favor with Esther. And then as the selection process, as the different potential queens went before the king found extra favor with Esther. And then again, in chapter 7, when we talked about it last week, she asked again, if I find favor with you, the king. So what is she literally asking for? We know that she wants to try to protect her people, but how can the decree has been made? How can the people be protected if the decree went out? And remind me what the decree is. All the people are supposed to destroy, kill, and annihilate the Jews. So the decree is out there. What is she asking for? Okay, to end the decree, revoke the decree. Are either one of those possible? Okay, so you can't end it, you can't revoke it. She would love for that to happen. So what does she literally ask for?
To let the Jews fight back.
Well, that's the edict that'll come out. So she wants some decree to be made to overrule it. And you've read ahead, so you know that eventually it's going to be the Jews are going to be able to protect themselves. But at this point in the story, she's just asking the king, can we have something that will overrule the plans to destroy the Jews? And she ends her plea with, how can I see disaster fall and destruction of my family? So often she referred to the Jews as her people. In this case, she's saying, how can I have destruction fall on my family, or have destruction of my family? Any other observations from verses 3 through 6?
Just a reflection that she didn't reveal herself, and now she is claiming the people that she kept quiet about.
Very good point. So when she was chosen as one of the potential candidates for queen, her and Mordecai had agreed that we were going to reveal that she was a Jew. And now has she not only gone beyond the point, but she's referring to all the Jews now as her family, as her people. Very good point. Anything else in verses 3 through 6? Okay, let's take a look at verses 7 and 8. Is there someone that's willing to read?
I will.
Okay.
King Xerxes replied to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, because Haman attacked the Jews, I have given his estate to Esther, and they have impaled him on the pole he set up. Now write another decree in the king's name in behalf of the Jews, as seems best to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For no document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked.
Okay, thank you. So just as much as Esther would like to have had the original decree end or have the original decree revoked, in the at the very end of verse 8, it says that literally cannot happen. So as Esther makes the plea, the king sort of recapped what he's done already. So what does the king say that he's done already? Well, Esther, I gave you the estate, and Haman was impaled at the gallows on the pole. And what's his solution? Write another decree. So the old decree can't be revoked, but now we're going to have some clever folks try to determine how can we prevent the destruction of the Jews by writing a second decree. So wants Mordecai to write a second decree, and what's important once the decree is written? Get it distributed, and even just prior to get it distributed. With the ring, right? We need to have it sealed with the ring. So that ring that Haman used for evil, that eventually became a ring being worn on Mordecai's hand. It's important to use that same signet ring with this decree.
And the king didn't specify what was happening. He left it to them.
And what term did he use?
As you seem, that seems best to you.
As you seem best to you. So a lot of faith is being put in Mordecai and Esther, and similar to what he did with Haman, right? He didn't dictate to Haman what that decree was to be. Haman had lied to the king, told him that there was these people out there that were not obeying his laws, which weren't true. He never told him that he was referring to the Jews. He let Haman determine the wording for that decree, and same thing with Mordecai. Let's take a step back just a little bit on emphasizing how no document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked. If you flip back to Esther chapter 1 and verse 19, what decree back then was put out, and what was the ramifications of it? Esther chapter 1, verse 19.
I think that was Queen Vashti.
Okay, so Queen Vashti is never again to enter the presence of the king. And it says at the beginning, therefore, if it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree, and let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media, which cannot be repealed. So again, another example of a decree coming from the king that cannot be revoked, cannot be repealed. And then if we take a look at Esther chapter 3, verses 12 through 14, that is the decree that Haman had, that the Jews should be annihilated, destroyed. And it says, so the king took his signet ring from his finger and gave it to Haman. And because the signet ring sealed that, then it could not be revoked. Okay, back to chapter 8. Any other observations or thoughts on verses 7 and 8? Okay. Presley, you were willing to read a little bit earlier. Will you read verses 9 and 10 for me, please?
At once, the royal secretaries were summoned, and on the 23rd day of the 3rd month, the month of the season, they wrote out all of Mordecai's orders to the Jews and to the satraps, governors, and nobles of the 127 provinces stretching from India to Kush. How far down?
9 and 10.
Okay. These orders are written in the script of each province and the language of each people, and also to the Jews in their own script and language. Mordecai wrote in the name of King Xerxes, sealed the dispatches with the king's signet ring, and sent them by mounted couriers who rode fast horses, especially bred for the king. Okay,
thank you, Presley. So it starts out in verse 9, once the royal secretaries were summoned. The exact same wording that was at the beginning of Haman getting everyone together for that decree. And we had mentioned last week, the author keeps comparing the first half of the book, which was sort of the plot against the Jews, and the second part of the book of Esther. And chapter 7 is about the turning point, and parallels the first part of the book with the second part of the book. So many times, the exact same language that was peril to the Jews is now used in the second half of the book to, as the Jews are going to be able to protect themselves. So it says that the royal secretaries were summoned on the 23rd day of the 3rd month, the month of Sivan, S-I-V-A-N. If we go back and take a look at Esther chapter 3, that is 2 months and 10 days after the first edict came out. So that's how much time has elapsed between the first edict in which the Jews are to be annihilated till this set of secretaries, royal secretaries are summoned. It's an elapsed time of 2 months and 10 days. Which languages are these written in?
Everyone they spoke.
Okay, so Persia had taken over quite a bit of territory. It was the largest government, the largest kingdom at the time. It indicates that it was 127 provinces, and it was written so that every single person would be able to understand it. It was written in their language. It's written in all the languages. Who are the orders written to? Take a look at verse, halfway through verse 9. They wrote out all of Mordecai's orders to the Jews. So even though it's going to be read and shared with everyone, this set of orders are specifically addressed and intended for the Jews.
Well, it says, and also the Jews. So everybody in the province, so that they could protect themselves, as well as the Jews.
Okay, so you're exactly right. If you take a look at the middle of verse 9, it says, they wrote out all the Mordecai's orders to the Jews and to the satraps, governors, and nobles of the 127 provinces. These orders were written in the script of each province and language of each people, and then also in the language that the Jews spoke as well, in their own script and their own language.
Would that be Hebrew or Aramaic?
I think that would be Hebrew. I think that would be Hebrew. So there'll be multiple scripts, right? It's going to go to all 127 provinces. Don't know how many languages are duplicated over those 127 provinces. More than likely, several of those provinces had people that spoke multiple languages. So they had all of these, and each one of those was sealed with what? The signet ring. So I don't know if there was 200 copies, 300 copies, 400 copies, but everything was sealed with the signet ring.
No wonder they needed secretaries.
No wonder they needed the royal secretaries. Exactly right. So I think Presley had jumped ahead when I'd asked some questions earlier. How is this new decree going to be dispersed? By horses. And was it just any old horses? The king's horses, the fastest horses, the ones that were literally bred in order to get decrees like this sent out. So the intent was to get it spread as soon as possible. And when I read this, it reminded me, Vicki and I had moved here from the state of Georgia, and the state of Georgia has, I should have looked this up, I'm pretty sure the state of Georgia has 99 counties. And there's been multiple discussions about how many counties are in Georgia, and would there be benefit from a financial perspective to combine counties so that you wouldn't have quite as many. And it's interesting, not that constitutions or things can't be amended, we certainly know they can, but in the original constitution for Georgia, each county seat at the extreme of the borders had to be no further than 1 day's horse ride so that you could go and participate at the county, whether it was for voting or whatever. So when I read that they sent out the decree on fast horses, ones that were absolutely bred for that, I thought, well, the idea of horseback has not only been there during biblical times, but during the Constitution of Georgia. However far you could ride in 1 day's ride on the horse made the boundaries for the counties there. Okay, any other observations from verses 9 and 10? Okay. How about verses 11 through 14? Someone willing to read?
I'll read.
Okay.
In them the king granted the Jews who were in each and every city the right to assemble and to defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate the entire army of any people or province which might attack them, including children and women, and to plunder their spoil. On 1 day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, the 13th day of the 12th month, a copy of the edict to be issued as law in each and every province was published to all the peoples, so that the Jews who would be ready for this day to avenge themselves on their enemies. Their couriers, hastened and impelled by the king's command, went out riding on the steeds, and the decree was given out at the citadel in Susa.
Thank you. Okay, so you could not erase the old edict, but we now have a new edict. And the new edict says that the Jews have the right to assemble and to protect themselves. And what are they able to do?
Destroy, kill, and annihilate.
Destroy, kill, and annihilate. And of course, that exact phraseology is what Haman used in his edict from chapter 3. Now, one thing that I want to point out, and then we're going to digress, is it says that they can destroy, kill, and annihilate any armed force of any nationality or province that may attack them and their women and children. So it's anyone referring to people. However, the very next continuation says they're able to do what? Plunder the property. So they're able to destroy, kill, and annihilate. In addition to that, they're able to plunder the property. And what does plunder the property mean? What's the term that we might use today for plunder?
Ravage it, just pilfer, take.
Okay, yeah. And sometimes in today's language we'll refer to the spoils of war, right? The things that we're able to take as a result of the war. So
it says armed men, so that indicates that the women weren't going to be armed.
okay, well, it probably implies that the women aren't going to be armed. But do the Jews have the right then to kill the women and children as well?
I wonder about that. You might attack them. Might is a pretty powerful word there.
So
Might attack them, the women and children.
that's right. So they certainly don't have to wait for the attack to happen. The Jews don't have to lose some of their soldiers or some of the people that are defending themselves. So as they see those that might attack them, and not only the men that would be part of the attacking process, but it also says their women, their wives, their women and children. Now, let's flip back to 1 Samuel 15:3. So, what is the history between the Amalekites and the Jews? You remember when we talked about this one of the earlier lessons? The Amalekites were the first set of people that attacked the Jews as they were leaving Egypt. So, as God freed the people from Egypt and they're wandering in the wilderness, you may remember they do that for 40 years. As they're in that process, the first group of people to literally attack the Jews is the Amalekites. Saul is now king. God has always had a thing in for the Amalekites because they attempted to attack the Jews, and God's intention is at some point the Amalekites are supposed to be eliminated. It's like they never even existed. So if we go to 1 Samuel chapter 15 verse 3, and this is Samuel, the prophet Samuel talking to Saul. Now go attack the Amalekites and totally destroy everything that belongs to them. Do not spare them. Put to death men and women and children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. So what's the difference between what God told Saul through Samuel, through the prophet Samuel? What's the difference in what God told Saul to do versus the edict now under Esther? Did you notice any difference?
They were supposed to kill every
That's exactly right. That's the difference. So when the edict comes out from Mordecai under King Xerxes, it says, you can kill and wipe out all the folks, but you're also able to take plunder. When God gave instructions to Saul, it was no plunder. Everything needs to be destroyed. So let's take a look at verse 9 in 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 9.
I'm not sure if this is where you're going, but is there any idea why?
Why God wanted it completely? God was upset with the Amalekites because they had attacked the Jews as they were leaving Egypt. So God's intent was there would be no remain of the Amalekites ever again. So
I think he wanted to put fear in all the other people and see that God was powerful and when he and respect his people.
You're exactly right. And in fact, you may remember when Haman came back the second time just before he got rushed off to the banquet, and he was complaining to his wife and his friends about having to honor Mordecai. They said, you know you can't take advantage, you can't do anything to the people, the Jews, because everyone knew the history of God protecting the Jews. So in verse 9 of chapter 15, but Saul and the army spared Agag. Okay, remember the Agagite Haman spared the kings and the best of the sheep and cattle, the fat calves, the lambs, everything that was good. They were unwilling to destroy completely, but everything that was despised and weak, they totally destroyed. So did they do what God said? Did not. So Saul will eventually lose his kingship. God will remove Saul as king because of him not completely destroying the Amalekites. So that's a little history. All of that's going to tie in, and we'll really talk about how the history ties in more next week. So if we flip back to chapter 8, the Jews would be ready to avenge themselves on the 13th day of Adar. So the month is Adar, and it's on the 13th day. Why the 13th day of Adar are they able to protect themselves? Why is it that day? Well, you may remember when Haman sent out the decree to kill the Jews, that was the day that was made to kill the Jews. And do you remember how they came up with that day? It was the roll of the dice. So just as they cast lots for Jesus' robes when he was crucified, they cast lots, rolled dice, rolled stones. They cast lots to determine what the day would be when the Jews would be destroyed. And it was the 13th day of Adar. So the new decree says on that day is when the Jews can defend themselves. And it says the couriers riding the royal horses raced out, spurred on by the king's demand. Okay, let's see about the rest of the chapter. Verses 15 through 17. Anyone?
I will.
Okay.
Mordecai left the king's presence wearing royal garments of blue and white, a large crown of gold, and a purple robe of fine linen. And the city of Susa held a joyous celebration. For the Jews, it was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor. In every province, in every city, wherever the edict or the king went, there was joy and gladness among the Jews, with feasting and celebrating, and many people of other nations, of other nationalities, became Jews because of the fear of the Jews that seized them.
Okay, thank you. So, the 13th day of Adar has not come yet. It's a couple months, 2 months and 10 days after the previous edict had come out to say that they were going to kill the Jews. How is Mordecai dressed?
Like a king.
He's got the royal garb on. When was the last time Mordecai was out in public with the royal garb on? When Haman was forced to show him off, right? So the king wanted to honor Mordecai because he had uncovered the plot to have him killed. He calls in Haman and says, how do we want to honor somebody who the king has found favor with? Haman thinks it's himself, and he goes through talking about the royal robes, the royal horse going through the city. So earlier in Esther, Mordecai was dressed the same way and was among the people. So 2 months ago, the people were to kill the Jews under Haman's decree. What do you think the non-Jews' reaction was when this new decree came out? So not the Jews, but the non-Jews. 2 months ago, Haman says we're supposed to kill all the Jews. Now this new decree comes out and says the Jews can protect themselves. What do you think the non-Jews' reaction was?
Fear.
Fear? Surprise? If we take a look at, it says in the city, in the latter part of verse 15, and the city of Susa held a joyous celebration. So the city, there were lots of non-Jews in that city, and there was a joyous celebration. In Esther 3:15, how did the people, the non-Jews, react when the original edict came out? Go back to Esther chapter 3, verse 15. What's it say about the city of Susa back then? Anybody have it? They were perplexed. Some translation says they were bewildered. So when the original decree came out from Haman, the city, not just the Jews, and especially the non-Jews, they were bewildered, they were perplexed. What is this all about? When the new decree comes out, it says that they held a joyous celebration. What does it also say at the end of chapter 8 that many of the non-Jews did?
Converted.
They converted to becoming Jews. And why?
Well, you're going to be killed if I'm a Jew.
Okay, if I'm a Jew, I'm now able to defend myself. I'm protected. So it may be a combination of two things. One is many people knew that the God of the Jews often gave the Jews victory in war. They allowed them to overtake other nations. So they had that history thing. And then the second part is this decree from the king, maybe it'd be best for me to convert to become a Jew so that I can protect myself and I don't have to worry about being killed.
This is where that word might has so much power, because it was up to the Jews with the swords to decide whether or not you were an enemy that might do something.
That's right. That's right. Now, because of history, who would be at the front of the line to kill the Jews? Anyone that had Amalekites ancestry, anyone that had Amalekites background, they would be the ones absolutely at the front of the line. Other nationalities may or may not have wanted to participate in that, but certainly many would, and the Amalekites would be at the front of the line. So when this new edict came out, we talked about the non-Jews, right? The non-Jews, when the first edict came out, they were perplexed, they were bewildered. Now it's a time of joy. Many of them became Jews in order to try to protect themselves. In these couple of verses, 15 through 17, how did the Jews react? What's it say? They celebrated and feasted. It says it was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor, feasting and celebrating. Now, if we go back to Esther chapter 4 and verse 3, someone have that? I flipped back too far here. Esther chapter 4 and verse 3.
And in every province, wherever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. So,
Thank you. So you've got the contrast, right? When the edict first came out, the non-Jews were bewildered. The Jews saw their demise, and so there was wailing and weeping. They were in sackcloth and ashes. When the new edict comes out, the non-Jews celebrate, but for the Jews it was even greater. It was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor, feasting and celebrating. So again, the author of Esther is contrasting what happened in the first half of the book with what happened in the second half of the book. So at this point, the new edict's out. Next chapter, chapter 9, it'll become the month of Adar, and we'll get to see what literally happens as the Jews go to defend themselves.
Awesome. Great job.
Chuck, the word perplexed on the first edict makes me think that maybe the people of the city were friends with the Jews. They had infiltrated, and these are the Jews that didn't want to go back to rebuild the temple. They liked their life there, so they were neighbors.
That's exactly right.
And they got along, and that's the only reason I can think that they would be perplexed would be the response.
So even though the Jews were not free in Persia, they also were not slaves, as all the other folks that were in Susa and throughout the 127 provinces. So people coexisted, they got along. There was little or less animosity. The Jews, up to this day, still have people that are against them, but they did coexist, and there was no fighting among the land of Persia then. So it was certainly perplexing, it was certainly bewildering for them to see this edict come out that now they're supposed to destroy and kill their neighbors, their friends, the people that they were living with. Great point.
In today's life, if you read the most recent Christian Chronicle, there was an article about the rabbi who was taken hostage in the temple when he was there, and there were only 2 other people with him. But he was the person that a teacher called on to bring into class, to talk to the class. And so he was a friend of the Christians and got along with the Christians, much like we're talking about now.
Yes, much similar. Yes, exactly right. Well, I appreciate everyone being here. Next week we'll go into chapter 9 and see how this thing turns out when it gets to be the 13th day of Adar. Appreciate you being here. Thank you.